Good afternoon.
Good afternoon.
Okay. I'm Dan Caron, director of the ACE Academies here. All the students that you see right here are taking part in different topics dealing with aviation and space, mostly aviation this week. If you guys look around and see people that were not here this morning, that's because they are with us from the New Hampshire Veterans Home. We invited some of the people from the Veterans Home over to get a chance to meet you and find out a little bit more about ACE Academy, but also to hear from our speaker today. Also, we have some parents showing up, so thank you for coming back, parents. Our presenter today is Marina Kirsch. Kirsch, is that correct?
Yes.
Okay. She'll be talking about her family's experience in Latvia, occupied Poland, and Germany before, during, and after World War II, as recorded in her book, Flight of Remembrance. If you haven't seen it, the books are right here, and hey, you'll be able to see them. I have mine at home, and I've read it a few times. You always pick up something new when you read through it. Her presentation has been given over 115 different venues in 13 states, provides a unique perspective while helping to preserve memories of World War II and the Holocaust. Her presentation includes parallels to the current conflict in Ukraine and encourages audiences to share their personal collective memories, as well as adopting a lifelong dream, goal, and vision powered by love and supported by faith. Marina immigrated to the United States with her family after World War II and has lived in a lot of places. She is currently a resident of Kensington in southern New Hampshire. In addition to being an author, Marina is mostly retired freelance graphic designer, book designer, and editor. She is also a New Hampshire Humanities speaker and an officer in the Distinguished Toastmasters with the Exeter Speak Ups Club in Exeter, New Hampshire. She considers it a pleasure and a privilege to connect with audiences. She will ask questions. I've seen her other video, and please answer those questions. It makes it really interesting because everybody out there has some great experiences, and she has a way of bringing those out. So without further ado, Marina.
Thank you. Thank you, Dan.
All right, you're welcome.
Thank you very much, Dan. And I'm going to start with a question, and some of you kids already know your answer. Is there value in a story from the losing side of World War II or any world conflict?
Yeah.
Now, there is, right? But for you kids, there might be another bit of value to the story, and that is that my father, Rolf, had a lifelong dream for a career in aeronautical engineering. How many of you have a dream for a career in aeronautical or aerospace engineering? Any of you? Okay, so a few of you are already thinking about that. But the other thing about my family story from World War II is that it was from the Axis side of the war. And it includes 2 German veterans. And Germany not only was defeated, but it was the chief aggressor of World War II, which caused the death of 50 to 70 million people worldwide. Now, with defense and relief budgets in the millions or the billions today, do you think we need a new perspective on those figures? I think, yeah, probably. Here's a new way of looking at 50 to 70 million people. If you buried 10 people per day, it would take more than 13,000 years to bury 50 million, and more than 19,000 years to bury 70 million human beings. World War II was a cataclysm without precedent. How many of you young people have studied a bit about World War II? Okay, a fair number of you. How about the Holocaust? Do you know about the Holocaust? Wow, okay, great. And adults too, actually, I didn't mean to exclude you. So I want to thank Dan Caron and Win Aero ACE Academies for inviting me here and hosting me. Very grateful. This was supposed to be a New Hampshire humanities presentation, but what happened is that DOGE cuts got rid of the grants. They had to pause the grant program, unfortunately. The good news is New Hampshire humanities will continue, but they will be much more dependent on individual donations from people like you. So on my very last slide, there will be a donation QR code for New Hampshire Humanities. And if you are able, please go there or go online when you get home and make a donation to support this organization that gave more than 600 free programs across the Granite State last year alone. We need to support them. This afternoon, you will hear part of my family story as recorded in my book, Flight of Remembrance. And the two main protagonists are my parents, Rolf Dutzman, a Latvian aeronautical engineering student, and Lila Wasul, the young woman that he met in 1940 Berlin. Way back in 2004, long before I ever thought I'd have the energy and the time and the patience to write a book, somebody in a screenwriting course that I took said this, but it's a story about Nazis. Well, I knew eventually that would come out from someone, and actually I wonder how many people may have thought it over the years, but the fact is that no one on either side of my family joined the Nazi Party or supported Hitler. And this is a fact that a lot of Americans do not know about, that not everybody in Germany was supportive of the Nazi regime. What is to be gained by a story from the losing side of a war? There are 5 takeaways to my family's story. So what is to be gained? I mean, after all, does humanity ever learn? Wars are still waged, dictators still rise, genocide is still perpetrated around the world. But I know one thing, and that is in order to know where we're going, we have to know and understand where we have been. So 5 takeaways. First, remembrance of World War II and the Holocaust. The second thing is that it has therapeutic value because it gives a face, a name, and humanity to the enemy, rather than denying or burying the past. Also, clarification of the devastation of war waged on home soil. When was that happening here in America? Does anybody know? When did it happen here? Just shout it out. Civil War, yes. And the other thing that the story does is it gives us a clearer sense of what the people of Ukraine are experiencing today. It also gives warning signs and perils of dictatorship and affirms the value of love, dreams, and faith in God to prevent despair, promote survival in adversity, and restore faith in the future. Couple questions for all of you now. How many of you, I don't know that any of you are old enough to have served in World War II, I doubt it very much, but if you did, raise your hand. Did anyone serve in World War II? Oh, wow, we have a World War II veteran. Was that in the European or the Pacific theater? Where? Italy, okay. The European theater of the war. We're going to be talking about that today. Well, welcome. We welcome you warmly. And I had two World War II veterans when I was down in Florida a couple of months ago. But before that, I had no World War II veterans since 2019. So I am delighted that you're here. Thank you. Now a question, how many of you had ancestors who served in the military of World War II on either side? Raise your hand. Now keep your hand up if they served on the Axis side of the war. So that would have been for Germany, Italy, Japan, or some of the lesser Axis nations? Anybody other than me? Yes? Where? Do you know where he served? No, but he served either for Germany or Italy, or there were a couple of other smaller countries in Europe. Well, thank you for sharing that. Oh, another one. And where?
Germany.
Germany, okay. All right, thank you very much for that. And I know that we have a lot of veterans present, so would you guys please raise your hand if you are a veteran from any war, any time? Okay, thank you so much for being here today, for serving. Most of us have no clue what some of you might have been through, but we appreciate your sacrifice. The other question is, do any of you have ancestors, and I suspect 2 of you did, who lived in parts of the world where the war was fought? So that would be Europe, Soviet Union, it would be North Africa, China, Japan, Philippines, and even Hawaii. You had ancestors that were in Germany? Okay. And how about you? You're not sure where, right?
No.
Not sure where. Anybody else? Yes.
Maybe in Papua New Guinea? Maybe.
Where?
Papua New Guinea.
Papua New Guinea. Well, I suppose, yeah, the war was fought there too. I don't know too much about that part of the world, even in the Pacific Theater, but yeah, thank you. And way in the back there. Germany?
Yeah.
Thank you. Anyone else that I missed? Okay, over here. England, okay. Hungary. Oh, we have others here. Yes, on this 3rd row.
I think some of my family was in the Holocaust. We're not sure, but there is some like.
In the Holocaust, yeah. And do you know which country they were living in before they were taken?
I would assume like Poland or like.
One of maybe an Eastern European country?
Yeah.
Oh, thank you for offering that. And yes, the 2 behind there, both of you, yes. Norway. Poland. Wow. Yeah, Poland was one of the countries that suffered the most of any country in Europe.
Why?
Well, I'll be going into that a little bit. You'll hear more about it. So thank you very much for that. Now I'm going to launch into my family story as shown on the cover of my book, Flight of Remembrance. The guy with the helmet, my father Rolf, after he was drafted into the German Air Force, the Luftwaffe, by this time he was age 22, and when he was only age 20, the family escaped Latvia, where they had been living before the first Soviet takeover. So it was an out of the pan and into the cauldron story. My parents, Rolf and Lilo, November 1944, when they got married in Germany. My older brother Ingo, at age 2, born in post-war Germany. Flying in up top, a little illustration that I did of a pre-World War II Latvian glider being flown by my father, Rolf. That little icon represents 2 things to me. First of all, my father Rolf's incredible passion and desire in life, his dream for a career in aeronautical engineering. Aerospace didn't exist yet, and aeronautical engineering was young. It was a very young field. But that little icon also represents my own desire to gain a higher and wider perspective on World War II through the researching, the writing, and now the presenting of my family story. There is the award symbol from the 2012 Best Book Awards in the Narrative Nonfiction category. I was delighted to receive it. You have a question?
How did you get all those pictures?
Well, my family always had a camera on my dad's side. On my mother's side, no, but my mother had an uncle who took photographs. So there are 132 photos in my book. And I was choosy. I could have put a lot more in there, but I'm so fortunate that I have those photos in the family archives. How many of you have read this book, Man's Search for Meaning? Anybody? Anyone familiar with it at all? Okay, it is a phenomenal book that I recommend everyone read in their lifetime. It's an international bestseller. This is the young adult version, and I highly recommend it because there are pictures in this version, and it's much easier to read as well. So this book and other sources, including videos and books on existential topics and World War II topics, are on my suggested reading and video list, which I'll send you if you're able to sign up on my clipboard. All I need is your name and email address if you're willing. So I'm going to start sending that around. And my list is not shared with anyone. I only send emails if I have an event coming up. You can also unsubscribe very easily. So Viktor Frankl wrote this book. He was a Viennese Jew who suffered through the Holocaust. He lost his entire family, including his parents and his wife. He wrote, "Nothing in the world would so help one to survive even the worst of conditions as the knowledge that there is a meaning in one's life." Yes, indeed. Viktor Frankl found meaning through suffering, even at Auschwitz. For my parents and grandparents who never met Frankl, never read his books, their lives, they were able to find meaning in their lives, and they were able to establish dreams and have love for each other and a faith in God through their Catholic and Lutheran faith. So those are factors that feature prominently in Viktor Frankl's book in order to establish meaning. He founded the third Viennese school of psychotherapy known as logotherapy after the war, and he has helped millions, maybe billions of people avoid or prevent depression, prevent suicide, and he helped them to find the core of meaning in their lives that would help to sustain them and promote survival in adversity. And my hope is that all of you might gain something from my family's story, from Frankl's book, and also from other sources on my list, because it is meaning that builds your future. Absolutely. Meaning builds your future. Let's time travel now back to 1924 Latvia. This is my father and family in 1924. My father is a little boy, second from left, with his mother Maria, his little sister Ruth, and his father Ernst in Latvian military uniform. Guess what? Ernst had a dream. His dream was always the same from childhood. Sitting on a hillside of his family's farm in Latvia, gazing out toward a sliver of the Baltic Sea on the horizon, he could see the ships going back and forth, and he always wanted to be captain of a ship bound for America. But that wasn't possible for him before or during World War II. My father, Rolf, at left, age 14. He's been building model gliders for years from American and German magazines. And he has this overarching goal in life to further the field of aeronautical engineering. He also, by this age, is already able to speak, read, and understand the English language, a skill that would save his life toward the end of the war. So you see how finding the meaning in your life, making wise decisions to support that meaning and to support your life can actually save your life. And here at the right, he's age 18, and he's holding a national Latvian award-winning glider. But by this time, he's gone as far as he can go with models. The previous year, he already started building his first full-size motorized plane and his first manned glider. Now remember I told you that I did the little flying in icon from a photo? Here it is. My father, Rolf, is flying this glider in Latvia with a group of young men called the Izargs. The Izargs were the closest thing that Latvia had to a national guard between the two world wars. But when the Soviet occupation took place, the Izargs were permanently disbanded. Now here you'll see something interesting. My grandmother Maria, in the left photo, was wearing the same beautiful museum quality dress that I'm wearing in the right photograph. I sometimes still wear it, but not as often. I'm trying to preserve it now, but I will show it to you. So I brought it to show you. It's a dress that my grandmother tailored and embroidered in the early 1930s. She wore it for a few years, but then when I was a teenager, she altered it to fit me. The embroidery design, look at the sleeves. The sleeves are absolutely stunning, the embroidery on them. The embroidery has been confirmed by a costume museum in Riga as authentic Latvian embroidery pattern. And the jewelry. This is called a kurzem brooch. It is worn by Latvian women to denote the family's wealth. So if you have more than one, you might wear them all at one time. I couldn't figure out how to do that, but we have 5 of them in the family collection. And this was from the Kurzem region of Latvia on the Baltic Sea in the southwestern part of the country. And it probably dates from about early 1900s. I'm also wearing a pendant. Actually, I'm going to show you that next. This pendant is what I'm wearing, and it is a Latvian 5 lots coin that someone put on a chain, and it's from 1931. Is it possible that my grandparents or my dad or my aunt might have handled this exact coin when they were living in Latvia? Minted in 1931 when they were living there. It came to represent, it has a Latvian maiden, the head of a Latvian maiden on the front, and that design came to signify Latvian freedom and independence between the 2 world wars, when Latvia was a free republic. And it continued to denote that after the Soviet takeover. And as probably many of you know, the Soviet takeover lasted a long time. So it was not an independent country again until after the fall of the Soviet Union in 1991. Which country, we're going to set the stage now for the next part of the story, asking you a question. Which country was feared more than any other across Europe, especially by people of German heritage? Just shout it.
Russia.
Yes, Russia, Soviet Union. I use the terms interchangeably. Winston Churchill once said, "The menace that Russia posed to all of Europe was like a riddle inside a mystery wrapped in an enigma." And it's still a riddle, an enigma, a mystery, and a menace today, especially after Putin's invasion of Ukraine. Joseph Stalin, who was a Russian leader during World War II, on the surface, everybody loved him. He was likable, he was fatherly, but in actuality, he was one of the worst dictators and mass murderers of all time. The paradox of my family story and that of so many millions of other people across Europe, especially Eastern Europe. Let's see, East is that way. The paradox was that the same diabolical regime, the Nazi regime, that masterminded the Holocaust and killed over 9 million people in the Holocaust, plus the 50 to 70 million others, that same regime saved the lives of millions of other people who had to escape their homeland because the Soviet occupation was about to take place. That is the paradox. But it was an out of the pan and into the cauldron story because they saved a lot of people in order to exploit them. And I might add that for people of German descent all across Eastern Europe, and there were pockets of German people all over Europe, they were at much greater risk under a Soviet takeover, of deportation or execution. And the small Baltic states of Lithuania, Latvia, and Estonia, unlike Ukraine today, they knew that they were helpless to prevent a Soviet takeover. They never declared war on either Nazi Germany or the Soviet Union. But for people who had to flee, people of German descent, the only country that would accept them was Nazi Germany. Some people have asked me, well, why didn't they go to England? Why didn't they go here and there? But they had no choice in the matter. It was either go to Germany or stay in Latvia, and they knew what would happen if they stayed. So in 1939, October, my father, Rolf, had just started studying aeronautical engineering at the University of Riga in Latvia, when an ominous phone call came from his father, Ernst, urging him to come home immediately. And for Rolf, life was never the same again. And the other thing that he feared was that his aeronautical engineering dream might also come to an end. But surprise, things actually worked out differently. So again, those small countries never declared war, and the family had to do something. They had to get out of Latvia. Ernst, my grandfather, was especially at risk. He had served as a Tsarist Russian officer in World War I for Russia. Then he was a Latvian officer between the two world wars, and he was an outspoken anti-communist. And everybody around him knew that, including people he worked with. The Dutzman family in 1939 still had no real clue about the Nazi regime and Hitler and what that was all about. But the verdict on Stalin had long been passed. The Stalin regime had long been recognized as a regime with little or no respect for human life. They could have given in to this despair. However, it was the meaning they found in their lives through their love for each other, through their being able to visualize a future despite cataclysmic circumstances, and their faith in a God who cared for them, that kept them on track and helped them to make that one wise decision, which was to escape Latvia while they could. This photo was taken shortly before Rolf, his mother Maria, his sister Ruth, and his father Ernst, along with 50,000 other German Latvians, escaped from Latvia to Germany in late 1939. And that was a very good decision to make. It saved their lives. And their sense of foreboding was chillingly accurate, because after the Soviet takeover, Latvian officers who failed to flee were shot on the spot, and tens of thousands of other Latvian citizens were either deported or deported and then executed. There was wave upon wave of tragedy that swooped over the Baltic states, Poland, and Ukraine as well. In Latvia, first, the Soviet takeover of 1940, then the German takeover of 1941, during which 75,000 Latvian Jews were murdered. Then finally, 1944 to 45, the second Soviet takeover, and each time, mass executions and deportations. In Eastern Europe, there was no right or wrong side to the war, and I'm going to explain that now. Depending on which regime came in, whether it was Nazi Germany or whether it was Nazi Germany or Soviet Union, you would be able to tell whether you and your family would live or die, and it largely depended on your ancestry and ethnicity. If you were Jewish, a German takeover by and large was a death sentence. However, early on, they did not know this. If you were Baltic German, on the other hand, A Soviet takeover felt like you were really endangered, and a German takeover felt almost like liberation at first. But absorb this fact. Here's Lithuania, here's Latvia, you'll see a map in a little bit, here's Estonia. The German troops came up first into Lithuania, then Latvia, then Estonia. By the time they got to Estonia, the Estonian Jews had been forewarned. They knew what would happen. So when the Soviet troops fled Estonia, 75% of Estonian Jews fled with the Soviet troops. And guess what? Most of them survived in the Soviet Union. For Baltic Germans, it was a total opposite story. If you did not flee the Soviet occupation, you most likely were dead or close to it. I like to share that fact because it shows that in some cases, the Soviet Union was the saving nation. Mark Twain once said, "War is God's way of teaching Americans geography," and I have to agree. In the tan is Germany proper. I don't know if you can actually even see that very much. Oh, there it is. Including East Prussia off to the right, so Germany proper. In the darker tan are countries and areas that Germany had already annexed, including the former Austria and half of the former Poland. The other half taken over by the Soviet Union and is partly off of my map. Further north, the Baltic states of Lithuania, Latvia, and Estonia. The family lived right on the Baltic coast, north of a larger city called Liepaja. Here it comes flying in. And also Kara-Osta. Kara-Osta is just north of Liepaja. That is where the family lived and where my grandfather Ernst was head of a department in a munitions laboratory right on the Baltic Sea. When the family fled, it was from the capital city of Riga via this dotted line down to an island that was part of Germany proper. The island was called Usedom. And as soon as their ship left the port city of Riga, they and the 2,000 other people on board became people without a home, people without a national identity, and people who had absolutely no idea what would happen to them under the Nazi regime. They were at the mercy of Hitler. One of the things that they feared most soon came to pass. They spent a short time on the island, but then they were sent eastward. The last thing they wanted to have happen. They were sent to occupied Poland, to the city of Poznań or Poznan. Poznan is a Germanized name, Poznan is a Polish, and after a first reference, I'm only going to use the Polish name. So Poland was the most dangerous part in all of Europe at the time. And they were moving closer to the Soviet threat in addition. So now I would like to show you a different map. It's a contemporary map that shows EU nations, because it's good to get a bit of a handle on NATO and the EU today and what that means to Europe and also to Ukraine in particular. So I have to backtrack just a little bit. In 1945, the United Nations was formed, but alas, with Russia, actually Soviet Union, and now Russia, part of the Security Council, that organization can do nothing whatsoever about the war in Ukraine. Can't stop it, can't prevent it, can't change it. In 1949, realizing there was this problem, the NATO military alliance was formed. And then in 1993, the EU economic alliance was formed. And together, they work as a combo to prevent another worldwide catastrophe. Remember too, the US and Canada are also members of NATO. In addition, there are many sort of NATO allies around the world, including Japan. So on this map, the EU member nations are in medium green, and that includes Sweden and Finland up top. Now, Sweden and Finland only just applied to NATO last year or the year before, and they were only just accepted last year into NATO. They applied after the war in Ukraine commenced because they realized this is a dangerous time in history. In dark green, the non-EU nations, including neutral Switzerland, the UK, and Norway. But the UK and Norway are members of NATO. Switzerland is not. In the lighter green, other countries that are not EU nations, but a couple of them, including Turkey, are members of NATO, and a couple of others, Ukraine, Moldova, and maybe one or two others, have applied to NATO and or the EU, but have not yet been accepted. They are definitely at risk. Now, Russian territory is in red. And for all practical purposes, you see the country in pink? That's called Belarus. Belarus is a Russian ally that allowed Russian troops to invade Ukraine across its southern border. So for all practical purposes, Belarus is also a Russian territory. Now at the southern end of Ukraine, you see a little red peninsula. That is Crimea, or the Crimean Peninsula, taken over by Russia in 2014, previously part of Ukraine. Now you might say, okay, but what is that little triangle of red between Lithuania and Poland? Does anybody know? Just shout it if you know. It belongs to Russia, but it has a different name.
I don't know the name of the peninsula Russians have with port access for the North Sea.
Well, yeah, actually, you're right. So it's called Kaliningrad, and no fear, everyone. There it comes flying in. I didn't know that that existed until after the war in Ukraine commenced. And then I read an article about it online. So that was previously East Prussia, part of Germany proper. But after World War II, it was given to the Soviet Union via the Potsdam Agreement. And that little triangle of red exponentially increases the threat to all of Europe, but especially the Baltic states. They have their backs to the sea. They're otherwise almost completely surrounded by Russian and pro-Russian territory, with the exception of 65 miles of common border, which you may or may not be able to see from the back, between Lithuania and Poland. They are definitely also at risk. So Kaliningrad exponentially increases the threat to all of Europe, and this is why, not only Kaliningrad, but the whole situation, why NATO and the EU are so essential for stability and security across Europe. Because European countries have faced threat throughout their history. And also, how the US responds to Russia is probably going to determine whether Russian aggression will be deterred or tolerated in the future. We dare not risk tolerating their aggression. Back to the story. Rolf is on the train to occupied Poland. He is apprehensive. What will happen next? He's writing in his diary. Will the Nazi regime draft him immediately? That was the biggest fear for him and for my grandfather. Or will they allow him to finish his aeronautical engineering education? My grandmother Maria, at left of this photograph, also pondering what the family's fate will be. In Poznan, their immediate fate was they were housed in crude, unheated barracks. The rations were equally dismal, and they slept on the floor on straw. That didn't last long either, though. Next, to their dismay, they were sent even further east to Litzmannstadt, or Łódź. Now, Łódź is spelled L-O-D-Z. Go figure, but that's the correct pronunciation. That didn't last too long either, though, because, remember I said out of the pan and into the cauldron? Well, the regime, Nazi regime, soon caught wind of the fact that my grandfather had some pretty tremendous technical skills. They sent the family next to Berlin. And it was there that my grandfather was drafted into the Wehrmacht, the German army, in 1942, and sent back up to that island of Usedom in the Baltic Sea, where the family had first landed when they took the ship from Latvia. And there he was sent to a place called Peenemünde, which was a top secret development center for the V-1 and V-2 rockets. He trained under Wernher von Braun for V-2 rocket inspection. How many of you have heard of Wernher von Braun? Okay, a number of you have. So he was actually pretty much the father of the US space program after the war. My grandfather trained under him, but that installation was bombed in August of 1943. And then the regime established a safer place for the mass production of the V-1 and V-2 at an underground top secret installation in the heart of Germany near a town called Nordhausen. And the installation was called Mittelwerk. It was there that my grandfather was sent for the last 14 months of the war to work as chief inspector of the V-2. A little more about that later. Oh, did you see the dot flying in? Here it comes. Red dot in occupied Poland on the Baltic Sea. That is a city of Danzig or Gdańsk, and I will mention that in a bit. Oh, and before I actually switch from this map, please note the areas in tan and light brown. Those are the areas that in March 1940 were already under Nazi control. And now witness the disaster, the catastrophe that was Europe in mid-1944. On this map, only the neutral countries of Switzerland, Sweden, and Finland are still free. And off the map, the UK, Spain, and Portugal. Everything else was under German domination. Let's go on now to the other side of the story. My mother, Lilo, is a little girl at age 2 between her parents, Gertrude and Walter Wessel. She was born and raised in Berlin, had a different perspective on Hitler and the Nazi regime because she basically grew up with it from age 13. It was 2 years after this photograph, when she was 11, that Hitler rose to power in Germany. He had already been around for a while, though. Everybody knew about him. And Lilo, around the time of this photograph with the long braids, she refused to join the League of German Girls. Hitler had my mother had a very strong faith in God from a young age. And she described the League of German Girls as fanatical, atheistic, and just totally not something she wanted to be involved with. The League of German Girls was commensurate with the Hitler Youth for boys. And she graduated early, 1 year early, in order to avoid mandatory induction into the League of German Girls. Very soon after this photo was taken, Germany became a place that had Nazi control from cradle to grave. Lilo also had a dream. Here she's age 19, and her dream from a very young age was for a loving, supportive, and harmonious home life and marriage. That did not exist for her parents during her growing up years. They had a rocky marriage which ended in divorce when Lilo was only 13 years old. So her dream will soon come to pass. After this photo was taken, shortly after, she met Rolf at an afternoon dance at the Olympic Stadium Cafe in Berlin. German World War II history is a cautionary tale. World conflict is often instigated by brutal dictatorships, such as the Hitler, the Stalin, and the Putin regimes. Common denominator for Nazism, fascism, communism, Marxism. It's all the same. It's dictatorship. It is dictatorship that is more to be feared than anything else. Hitler rose to power in only a few years, mostly by legal means, and never with a majority vote. He never had a majority vote. He was backed up and supported and helped by a group of civilian thugs called the Brown Shirts or Sturmabteilung. They're shown in this photograph. They helped him to attack and dismantle democratic institutions, arrest, imprison, and murder his political and other opponents, anyone who spoke out against him. And they also helped to take control of the press and the military. But some years later, when the Sturmabteilung no longer served him, he felt they were a liability, he turned on them as well. He had most of them murdered in a single night by the SS. That night was called the Night of the Long Knives. Hitler had no loyalties. And by 1934, Germany had morphed from a democracy with a free press into an absolute dictatorship under the pretense of restoring Germany's greatness. Hitler had no intention of ever stepping down from power. The other thing he did is he asserted the Reich Church on Germany. He foisted it off on the German Lutheran Church. Not everyone was a member of a Reich Church, but many people were. And the Reich Church totally denied the Jewish origins of Christianity. In other words, if you know a little about Christianity, Jesus wasn't Jewish, the disciples were not Jewish, the Old Testament did not exist, only the New Testament, and they were probably German. So there were people who dissented and objected to that, mostly Catholic priests, lay people, monks, nuns, but also some from the Confessing Church of Dietrich Bonhoeffer. How many of you have heard of Dietrich Bonhoeffer? Okay, well, he is considered one of the heroes of World War II for resisting the Nazi regime. But they were arrested, imprisoned, and executed right alongside millions of Jews, Roma, communists, people who today would be considered LGBTQ, and others who were targeted, vulnerable groups. What was Hitler's intention? Well, it was he wanted to completely eradicate not only Judaism, but Christianity, historical, traditional Christianity from Germany. So my warning is, today, beware of any kind of distortion in faith traditions, because what happened in Germany was that the majority of Christians in Germany became either willingly or cluelessly complicit with Hitler's rise to power and everything that happened after that. The measure of a man is what he does with power. That's a quote from ancient Greek philosopher Plato. And also, the price of apathy towards public affairs is to be ruled by evil men. Both good quotes that still apply today. And here's a quote from me. Democracies around the world require vigilant, informed, and socially active citizens and leaders of goodwill and integrity. That is what we need in our world and across the globe. The city of Gdańsk in occupied Poland, I showed it to you flying into the map. Rolf received the welcome news in late 1940 that he would be allowed to finish his aeronautical engineering education, and it was in the city of Gdańsk. So this city was once a free city of Europe, but no longer, completely under Nazi control. However, Rolf hoped that the war would be long over before he received his diploma. But that, unfortunately, was not to be. In late 1941, the same day that he received his diploma, he also received his draft notice into the Luftwaffe, the German Air Force. And for Rolf, this was pretty much a disaster. He's shown here reading a Berlin newspaper. He's in uniform, And by this time, in 1942, Germany had already instigated war with the Soviet Union. And so many of the stories in the newspapers were about the horrors of war being waged on the Eastern Front. That was the place where no German soldier wanted to be sent. Rolf was fortunate, though, is that for most of the war, because of his technical education and capability, at first he was put to work teaching airplane design and aerodynamics, and after that he also trained on manned gliders, and he trained to be a navigator. But before he finished his navigator training, he was sent briefly to the front. So two things. What he did during the war actually supported his dream in life, but in addition, it kept him safe from the front until the very end of the war. I'm happy to report that he was never forced to fly any bombing or combat missions against the Allies. 3 cities in Germany were very badly bombed. So Berlin was one of them, but there were 2 other cities that were bombed even worse in terms of intensity and resulting firestorms. Does anyone know or venture to guess? Just shout it. Frankfurt? Dresden. Yes, absolutely right. Dresden. Does anyone know the other city? Dresden is further south, the other one's further north. Hamburg. Wow, you people are on the ball. Thank you. Yes, here they come. There is Hamburg, and there is Dresden on the map. Germany sustained more than 1.4 million tons of bombs during World War II. And Rolf's family's home was also bombed. Here's the exterior and the interior. Lilo's home, in addition, was bombed, 1 story at a time, until finally, top 2 stories blown away, walls and ceilings badly damaged, windows shattered, pipes burst, and water flowing into the apartment. They could no longer live there. But they were finally allowed by the regime to move out of Berlin. You had to get permission. Sad post note, though, is that her entire family, other than her mother, remained trapped in what became the Soviet zone and later East Germany. She never saw her father or her other family members again. The only known photograph of my grandfather Ernst in the underground installation of Mittelwerk, where the V-2 rocket was mass produced. And I had to do a lot of reading and research because he never talked about it. We only knew what his title was. So I found out that there were books and post-war transcripts by former inmates that indicated Ernst befriended an inmate in his department. Yes, there was a much feared slave labor camp outside the gates. I had to do so much research, but he saved the life of Czech inmate Yuri Benish, who also wrote a book and post-war transcripts and talked about his interactions with my grandfather. 3 regrets. I didn't know the questions to ask him. Young people, ask questions of your family members. 2, he may never have known that Yuri Benish survived the war. And 3, he may always be listed among the perpetrators just for having been forced to work in this place. Here's a V-2 rocket. It stood 46 feet high, and it actually was inspected and partly developed in that underground tunnel system. It was the first guided ballistic missile in the world, and it was the forerunner of modern rocketry. Here's an underground tunnel in the Mittelbau-Dora concentration camp memorial as it looks today. So a love story was playing out with the Allies at the borders of Germany ready to encroach in November of 1944. My parents got married, but the worst times for civilians and military personnel were still ahead. Within 6 months of these photos, Rolf and Ernst were taken prisoner of war, and Lilo and Gertrude had to escape the Soviet troops. Rolf, shortly after this photo was taken, was sent to the front. But by that time, with no weapons left to give out, and the war as good as over, according to a lot of people, their unit was told to disperse. Rolf walked 160 miles homeward toward where he thought home and family might still be. And that, folks, is a tragedy of war waged on home soil. Not only military personnel, but homes and families are at risk. And that's what we see playing out tragically in Ukraine today. The next part of the story I am skipping, actually. You can read about it in the book, how love, dreams, faith in God, and my grandmother Gertrude helped a family to reunite and to survive the worst war in human history. Rolf and Lilo smiling down at their post-war dream, my older brother Ingo at age 2. And here at age 3, he has a tail, sewn onto his overalls by my grandmother Maria, who made the dress. I do want to say, my brother Ingo and I have had lifelong questions about complicity and awareness. How much did they, our parents and grandparents included, know about the Holocaust and death camps? Well, pretty much everybody in Germany knew about concentration camps, and people in the upper echelons of the military, the government, and industries that supplied the camps had all the gruesome details. But others didn't necessarily know who was sent there, how many people were sent there, and how they were treated once they got there. The deportations, well, the regime claimed that deported people were being resettled in Poland and life would be beautiful. We now know those were death camps that they were transferred to. The Nazi regime did not publicize the killings during the war, the genocide, and neither did Allied sources by and large. Rolf and Lilo were appalled and horrified when they found out about the Holocaust in the post-war time via Allied magazines and newspapers. How much did Ernst know during the war about genocide? Don't really know, because the installations where he worked both had camps, but by and large, it was not people from targeted groups like Jews, Roma, and others who were sent there. It was partisans and resistance fighters who were sent there. We will never know the answers to all of these questions, unfortunately. On my reading list that I'll send if you sign up on the list, there's a book entitled What We Knew by Johnson and Rubin. They conclude maybe a third of the people in Germany knew everything, a third thought they might know but had no proof, and a third were completely clueless. We ourselves must be the eyes, the ears, and the voice of remembrance for this tragic chapter in world history. It was a disaster site in Germany after the war, but the worst thing was the Soviet threat, which still hung over all of Europe. So my grandfather Ernst encouraged Rolf and Lilo to immigrate to America, and we did. Do we have any immigrants in the audience?
My grandfather.
Your grandfather, okay. Ancestors, grandparents, parents? From, okay. And anyone else? Yes, back there. Where? Okay.
I think both of my great-grandparents' parents from Scandinavia.
Scandinavia, okay. Thank you for that. Well, I have another presentation I'm giving here in August, which will be about the post-war time, our immigration to the U.S., and early years in the U.S., including more details about my father's aerospace career. But I will tell you a few things. My mother was 8 months pregnant when they left Germany, and thanks to fog that wouldn't let our plane take off, I was born in a neutral country. I was born in Switzerland. We became naturalized citizens in 1958, all except my younger brother Roland at left, who was born here. And shortly after that, my father Rolf and my grandfather were both hired by Chrysler Missile and Space Division near Detroit, where Rolf headed a team of engineers that built components of the Saturn 1B rocket. Those were later used in all of the Apollo moon missions. So amazing how his career expanded. If he could say something, especially to you young people today, I think he would say this. He would say, dreams are critical to your future. Dreams are critical. Hold on to those dreams. Work toward your dreams, and they will build your future. He volunteered here in New Hampshire for over 30 years. And this final photograph is a reminder that what we share with others lives on in their lives and in their memories. I encourage each of you to find the gem of meaning in your own life that you can use like rocket fuel to uplift and inspire other people. And together, my hope is that we will launch a future that's free of war, genocide, dictatorship, and blessed with liberty, where all people can fulfill their dreams and their life's purpose. I thank you. Okay, are there any questions? Dan, do we have just a couple of minutes?
Couple of minutes.
Okay,
There's a lot of parents outside to pick up
They're
their
waiting.
children, so.
okay.
I saw a picture, it was like two big ovens.
Oh, two big ovens during the Holocaust. That's where they incinerated the bodies of people who died. The Jews, the communists, the Roma, gypsies, and other people who were being targeted by the Nazi regime. It's a sad fact. You young people, many of you have probably heard of the Holocaust. It was a terrible and tragic time in history that we dare never, never allow to repeat. Yeah, they were ovens. Other questions from anyone? Yes?
I think I understood this right, but I'm just double checking. So your parents and your grandfather, they never wanted to, like, they would never, like, support the Nazi party, they were kind of, like, forced into the...
No, they were not forced in. And in fact, I have to wonder if the fact that they were from Latvia, there might have been some stigma attached. In fact, my father experienced a bit of stigma, which I write about in the book, just for having been from Latvia. They were looked down upon a bit, in spite of my grandfather's technical skills. And perhaps that was a good thing. I'm glad they never joined the Nazi Party. It makes it easier for me to present their story because they were people, especially my father and family, coming in from Latvia. The war had already started. They hadn't seen Hitler from the early days when he first gained power. And they were just trying to assimilate. They were trying to survive, basically. So, other questions from anyone? Well, I'd like to thank all of you for attending. And I'm going to just show a final slide. Oh, there. Okay, my email address is there, and the QR donation code is there in case you'd like to make a donation to New Hampshire Humanities. Thank you very much, everyone, for attending. Appreciate it.